Who have been the best 10 AFL midfielders for the last decade? From 2013 all the way to 2023, for the last 10 years, I'm going to be giving you the best 10 mids. Before we get started, you can check out my top 10 AFL forwards, defenders, rucks, coaches for the last decade on my YouTube channel. So go have a look at that. Make sure you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow the TikTok FTFooty and let's get started. At number 10, the best midfielder for the last decade, I've got Patrick Cripps. Now, Patrick Cripps, he has been a phenomenal midfielder for Carlton. Now, for those who haven't watched these before, the way we're going to rank the list is based on body of work, most importantly, how much has that midfielder done for the last 10 years. Accolades won, which include the Brownlow, Premierships, Norm Smiths, things like that. All Australians as well. Them in their prime, in their absolute prime for the last 10 years, how good are they? You know, that'll get them some points. Even things down to their ability as a midfielder. You could argue statistics as well, however, I'm not looking at statistics. I'm looking solely on the player. So let's keep going with Patrick Cripps at number 10. Body of work, he's been doing it for the last, 8 years. He's been a leader at Carlton really since he came to that club. He was placed on a podium as the person who would save that club, and he's relatively done that now. Carlton look like they have stability. They look like they will be fighting for prelims again next year, and it's on the back of that man, Paddy Cripps. He's won the Brownlow, you must remember. He's got 3 All-Australians. So in terms of what he's done, and in his prime as well, when Patrick Cripps is on, goals, untackleable, if that's even a word, 40 touches, you know, inside work is phenomenal, leadership, captain. I feel like he deserves a top 10. However, there are 9 better. At number 9, I've got Travis Boak for the Port Adelaide Football Club. Now, Boak is an interesting one because in his prime, I don't think he's near anyone else on this list. But the reason I have him in is body of work for 10 years straight. But for the last 10 years, his body of work has been phenomenal. Captain of the club as well, so I do take that leadership role into account. Consistently there, he's a big game player. He stands up in big moments. He plays well in finals. He hasn't led Port Adelaide to a flag, and he hasn't had any personal accolades. However, the 3 All-Australians, he had like a 6-year gap between his second and his third, aging like fine wine, and he definitely deserves to be in this top 10 list. In 8th place, I'm going to say something very controversial here that many will very much disagree with, but I'll give you my reasoning. I've got Lachie Neale in 8th place. Now let's talk about Lachie Neale. Let's say the obvious. He's got 3 All-Australians, very impressive, 2 Brownlows, which should propel him to at least a top 3, right? But when I look at Lachie Neale, in terms of his prime, I think he's one of the worst on this list. At his peak, in terms of body of work, he's up there. You know, he did it at Fremantle for a couple seasons and he's been doing it for Brisbane ever since. But I'm going to be completely honest. For those who do follow my TikTok, they'll know how much I fucking hate the Brownlow. The Brownlow is not an accurate representation of the best player for that year. Now, in 2020, a COVID year, he was the best player. I'm not arguing that. He was by far the best player. But the Brownlow he just won, he was nowhere near for me the best player. I could name you at least 6 players who were better than him. So I'm not taking the Brownlow too much into consideration because as an award, I don't value it that much. Now, Lachie Neale, he actually does stand up in big moments. He is, I think, a pretty good big game player. Every now and then he has those games where he sort of hides in those big games, but more or less I think he's good. Like I said, body of work has been up there, but in his prime and just as a midfielder, when I watch him, I don't get as mesmerized by the other names higher up on this list. Only 3 All-Australians, so you could even argue the fact he didn't even get All-Australian in the Brownlow year. So that just shows that perhaps that year was overrated. I had to have him in the top 10 nonetheless because he has been phenomenal. However, only 3 All-Australians. Others on the list have more. I think being an All-Australian is a more reputable way of defining a player's season rather than the Brownlow. At number 7, I've got a man who was heavily contemplating putting in at number 8. It was between Neale and this guy, but this guy for me, I put him at 7 for reasons I'll keep going on to. It's Marcus Bontempelli. Bont, he's got the flag. He should have won the Norm Smith that game. Phenomenal big game player. Importantly, a great leader, captain of the Dogs, professional. In his prime, he is probably top 3 on this list. Like when he's on, he's absolutely unstoppable. He's come so close to the Brownlow, and like I said, I'm ignoring the fact, not ignoring it, but I just don't value the Brownlow that much. And the fact he hasn't got one, I'm not really focusing on that. Body of work, he's been playing phenomenal football for around 7 to 8 years. Pretty similar to Paddy Cripps, but the thing with Bontempelli is he has the silk touch. He has that crazy ability in the wet where he's head and shoulders above anybody else. powerhouse. Even things down to his kicking, his decision making, his run work, defensive output, offensive output. 5 All-Australians, so it's important to note that, you know, he has won more than the 3 previous on this list. He's led the Dogs to a grand final, well, I guess you could say 2 grand finals, one of them they won, but he was heavily involved in that 2021 push for the granny. And for me, he has to be up there. I love Bontempelli, I love him as a player, and I think for the last 2 years he's been the best player in the competition. And for that reason, he's at number 7, but there are 6 better. And at number 6, I've got Joel Selwood. 5 and 6 for me were also extremely heavily debated. 7 and 8 were debated, now 5 and 6 are being debated. I'm pretty sure you can work out who number 5 is. A very similar player in many respects to Joel Selwood. But Joel Selwood for me, let's look at the positives. 4 All-Australians for the last 10 years. Captain of Geelong in their flag winning year, so he's won the flag as a captain, which I think is phenomenal. He's extremely courageous. Yes, throughout his career, I did have some question marks regarding his ducking in tackles, controversial free kicks, which I think drew a little bit away from the courage that he had as a player, standing up at big moments, big game player in his prime, a very, very strong player, constantly up in the Brownlow, not for the last 5 years, but I think he well deserves a top 10. People would have him higher. All in all, I just think the leadership qualities he has is better than anybody in this list. And having Geelong, keeping Geelong as such a relevant and quality team for all those 10 years. And you've just seen, like, this year's the first year Geelong's really struggled, and that's the year that Joel Selwood wasn't playing. But just shows you the value that he has to that team. He's an easy number 6. Now at number 5, like I said, an eerily similar player to Joel Selwood. It's another captain or ex-captain of a football club of the Pies, Scott Pendlebury. Scotty Endlebury, as that bloke said in 2010. Now, unfortunately, he hasn't won the flag as a captain, but he still won a flag, arguably as an off-field leader, or as, you know, not a captain, but clearly one of the leaders of that team. Him, alongside Travis Boak, are a great example of aging like fine wine. Age does not affect them. Pendlebury, most disposals of all time. He's going to break records after records. He is coming for them. He's still looking good. He's treating his body well. He's not getting big injuries. He could play for another 2, even 3 years if he gets lucky. But let's look at body of work. For 10 years, like Selwood, both have been playing phenomenal football for 10 years. Captain, leadership, big game player. And I think the reason I have Pendles above Selwood is I think Pendlebury has something similar to what Bont has that no one else has ever had in the competition. It's where when Pendles gets the ball, time slows down. And that ability, which is one of the things we're doing this on, that ability in Pendlebury, the fact no one else has that. You know, Bontempelli gets closest, but it's nowhere near what Pendles can do. That's why he's in 5th. And I've always said in those debates, Selwood versus Pendles, who's better, blah, 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 blah. I've always taken the side of Pendlebury because I think he just has more to offer in his general game. But let's not get it twisted. Both are phenomenal players. Pendles only has the 3 All-Australians compared to Selwood's 4. So a bit of jeopardy and controversy surrounding that. However, he has to be in. Now, in my 4th place, this is where things get very interesting. This top 4, I think a lot of people have the same top 4. It's just in what order. In 4th place, I've got a man who's only won 3 All-Australians, which I was absolutely astonished by. He's similar to Lachie Neale in the sense that in his good years, you know, the years he won All-Australian, he was winning the Brownlow as well. He's got 2 of them. It's Nat Fyfe. Now, Fyfe is number 4 for an array of reasons. Body of work for 10 years. Also captain of the Fremantle Football Club. Yes, he hasn't won any team awards, but 2 Brownlows, one of them heavily deserved, I believe, in 2015. Yeah, in 2015, he deserved that Brownlow. Even years before that, in 2013 and 14, he was one of the best, if not the best player in the competition alongside some others. Injuries, man. Injuries fucked this guy up. The broken leg, just injuries throughout his career. Even now, for the last 2 years, he's really been struggling. I don't agree with the Brownlow he won in, well, not that I don't agree with the Brownlow he won in 2019, but I think that was a year where no midfielder was really out and out the best. There wasn't a clear best player in the comp, but nonetheless, he still won it. A big one for Fyfe for me is ability and prime. Obviously, body of work, everything else, but ability, high flying, strong tackle, extremely strong, physical, tall. He can't be tackled. You know, presence on the ground, in the air, in defense, in attack. I think he lacks a bit with his kicking. Big games. Is he known for being a big game player? I'm not so sure. Obviously, he would be decent in big games, but he's not really known as that big game player that some others in the top 3 are. So that ability is there, but the prime Nat Fyfe, 2014, 2015, when he wasn't in the, you know, periods of injury, Nat Fyfe was colossal. He was fucked. Literally fucked. Bro was crazy. Dude's just fucking elite. I can't lie. So there's a lot of reasons why he's not in the top 3. Like I said, accolades won, you know, hasn't won a flag. Kicking, 2013. The injuries is probably the big one. I think they just held him back a little bit. And I think body of work for others might be a little bit greater because of those injuries and time missed for the last 10 years. Before we get into the important top 3, I'm going to go through some honorable mentions. Now, it must be said, there were a couple names here that I originally had in the top 10, which I took out. Let's go through some of the ones who weren't really considered. Dane Swan, 1 All-Australian, sort of past his prime from 2013 to 2023. David Mundy, I put in there just purely because of body of work. Both of those two have 1 All-Australian. Dan Hanbury. Now, those who haven't been watching footy for a long time, they'll be laughing at that shout, but those who remember him at Sydney, he was a phenomenal player. 3 All-Australians for the last decade. But he wasn't really considered. Matt Priddis was considered 1 All-Australian and a Brownlow, but not really. Sloan, body of work as well, was great from Rory Sloan. In terms of wingers, Andrew Gaff and Still Sidebottom were heavily sort of... I did, take time to think about those ones, but they just weren't quite there. Tom Mitchell, yes, he's won the Brownlow, 2 All-Australians, but body of work's not quite there, but a very good big game player. Trent Cotchin, body of work, 3 flags as a captain, but not enough to get in the top 10. You could argue Chris Judd, Sam Mitchell, but they were towards the latter end of the career by then. Zach Merritt, Clayton Oliver, they were very close to getting in. 3 All-Australians each. Been great players for the last 5-6 years, but body of work just isn't there. Players have been playing for the last decade, for the whole decade, rather than just half of it. And now, for the main honourable mention, the man who I couldn't find a place for, and I hate to say it, but he has got 4 All-Australians, which is more than Paddy Cripps, Boak, Neil, Pendles, Fife at 3. He's got more All-Australians than 5 of these players in my top 10 list. The man who misses out is Christian Petrarca, and it is an absolute shame I'm leaving him out. He has won the 4 All-Australians. He has won a Norm Smith. Subsequently, he's also won the flag. Big game player. Prime, I think he has been brilliant. But when I look at Petrarca, I think he's always been second to Bontempelli. So I couldn't put him past Bont, which means he had to go at 8, 9, and 10. Lockie Neal at 8, you had to have Lockie Neal in. 2 Brownlows, a grand final, many All-Australians. So it was between Petrarca, Boak, and Cripps. I wanted Boak because he had an All-Australian in 2014 and in, I believe, 2020 or 2021. So that is literally nearly a decade of elite body of work. And I think you had to just give him credit, captain as well. And then Paddy Cripps. Paddy Cripps originally wasn't in my list. It was actually Cripps out and Petrarca in. Let's give hands here. Accolades, let's call it even. Brownlow for Cripps, Norm Smith for Petrarca, pretty much the same. Petrarca's got more All-Australians in the flag, so that's probably an extra vote for him. In terms of their prime, I think Paddy Cripps on his day is better. Body of work, Paddy Cripps is a little bit older, so he's just had more time in the AFL to develop and to show that body of work. Paddy Cripps is a captain, importantly, which I think is good to know. He's a leader. I just think when I was evaluating this list, when I asked myself the ultimate question for the last decade, 2013 to 2023, which is technically 11 years, but let's ignore that. We'll say 11 years, 10 years. Petrarca or Cripps? Who's been better? When I weigh things up, I think it's Cripps. In terms of what he had to deal with at Carlton, look, both teams have had rough points for the last 10 years, but particularly Carlton. I just had to put Cripps in, man. I'm really sorry to Christian Petrarca, but you're not in. Anyway, I've got Cripps at 10, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. But let me know in the comments if you agree with that. I just finished recording, and I completely forgot to mention Josh Kennedy. He was on my honourable mentions, however, I just didn't see him for some reason. He did win 2 All-Australians, was really good for Sydney throughout that time, sort of early on from 2013, 2023, the earlier of that decade, but body of work just isn't quite there, accolades just aren't quite there, and that's just why he's not in. I'm sorry. On to my top 3. At number 3, I've got the man with the most All-Australians, okay? He's got a Brownlow too. Of course he has a Brownlow. Patrick Dangerfield. I've got Danger as my number 3. Let's look at Dangerfield, body of work. Look, at the end of the day, these 3 players are amazing. Dangerfield has been phenomenal at Adelaide and Geelong, importantly. Won the flag. That Brownlow year, Dangerfield in 2016, in his prime, was arguably the best player many have seen. Before I go on to the reasons and shit, I'm going to give you my number 1 and 2, because I think number 1, 2, and 3 for me were all pretty close. Number 1, the best player for the last 10, or the last decade, 11 years, is Gary Ablett Jr. You have to agree with that. Let's go through Gazza really quick. Brownlow in 2013, so when the decade started, he was the best player. In 2014, he has had the best portion of a season I've ever seen. In his prime, Gary Ablett in 2014, before he got that shoulder injury against Collingwood in round 16 or something. He was the best player I've ever seen, okay? Ever. So prime on this list, Gary Ablett is head and shoulders above. Accolades, unfortunately, he didn't get the flag in 2020 with Geelong. All the flags he won for Geelong were before 2013. Only 2 All-Australian. But Gary Ablett's influence for the Gold Coast Suns was phenomenal. Captain of that club, coming back to Geelong, injuries hampering him, but still performing very well. He has to be at number 1. That wasn't a debate. Number 2, I have got the man from this club, Dustin Duzzle Does Martin. Dustin Martin, Dusty, he is at number 2. Paddy Dangerfield at number 3. Now, Dustin Martin, we'll quickly talk about him. He's won the 4 All-Australians, 1 Brownlow, obviously. He should have made 2 All-Australians that he didn't. Now, it might be a bit of bias talking, but there were 2 seasons where he made the top 40 for All-Australian, but not the final list, which was fucking bullshit. And so obviously, like I said, every award always has, their opinion based, so it's always hard to quantify or to identify the true winner of that award. Now, Dustin Martin, the Brownlow year in 2017. In terms of a full year, 2017 was the best year from any player arguably in history. You look at Dustin Martin in 2017, Norm Smith won the flag, won the Brownlow, never done before. Gary Ayres Awards, the Best Finals Player Award. Richmond Best and Fairest, you can throw in there. The Wayukin Award for the Dreamtime, Best Dreamtime Player, Richmond vs Essendon. Coaches, Players Association Award. Every individual award apart from the fucking Coleman, this guy won. Okay? Now, Gary Ablett in 2014, for that portion before he got injured, if he'd kept playing that way, that would have been a better year, despite any accolades won. Because the reality is, Gary Ablett at Gold Coast, he put himself in a position where he couldn't win, and I am taking that into account, the fact that he didn't really fail at Gold Coast. Gold Coast failed him. But for those 3, let's compare them. Danger, Dusty, Ablett. Prime, Ablett and Martin get a vote, because Martin in 2017, and then Ablett for a bit of 2014. In terms of accolades, I think Dustin Martin has to get the most votes. 1 Brownlow for all 3 of them for the last 10 years. Obviously, Ablett's won 2, but only 1 for the last decade. But Dustin Martin, 3 Norm Smiths, which is phenomenal. And you might be wondering, I'm giving him the glizz, the big sucky. How is Dustin Martin not at number 1? And I just think, if you say to someone, and anyone, including myself, the best midfielder for the last 10 years, it still is Gary Ablett. Despite the fact that he was falling a little bit behind the pack by sort of 2018-19, when injuries really started to hurt him and curtail his career, I still think just throughout that 2013 to 2017 period, absolutely ballistic. Phenomenal, carrying Gold Coast on his back. Statistically, I'm sure throughout that period there would be many statistics in his favor. Best leader out of the 3 is Gary Ablett. He had the best prime out of the 3. Ability-wise, I think Dustin Martin's probably as good as a kick, but Gary Ablett had a phenomenal kick. Very underrated kick. Strong hips, couldn't tackle him. Because he's small, his groundwork was really good. Touches, big game player as well. In terms of big game player, obviously Dustin Martin is the best big game player, arguably, of all time, okay? I'm putting that shit out there. But it's Gary Ablett. Gary Ablett is arguably the greatest player of all time. So how could he not be the top 10 of this? How could he not be number 1? If we talk about Dustin Martin and Dangerfield, it's a real close one. In terms of player for player, I think you could say Dangerfield has a greater body of work, because Dusty only started to really hit the ground running, being top 4, top 5 players in the comp in 2016. But even this year, Dustin Martin should have made All-Australian. He made the top 40 list, but he should have made All-Australian. That's just showing that this man is aging like fine wine. 2016, he started to blow people's minds, and he's still doing it to this day. That's why he's above Dangerfield. I don't think it's that much of a debate. The fact he's won the 3 flags and 3 Norm Smiths is end of discussion between Dangerfield. But for those who do think Dustin Martin is better than Gary Ablett for the last 10 years, I think just watch Gary Ablett back 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, and then you'll sort of understand what I'm getting at. A lot of people might not have it won purely because, his later career was not tainted his legacy, but, he certainly wasn't performing like he was back early on in the days, but he was very old, Gary Ablett retired at 34, 5, 6, something crazy. But anyway, that is my final list. Let me know if you agree with the list. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below your top 10 midfielders for the last decade, 2013 to 2023. Give me all your reasons, follow the TikTok FTFooty, and I'll see you in another video, perhaps another top 10.